Hi everyone, I'm Znek, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Ethel Cain lore. Most people I've seen talk about Ethel only focus on Preacher's Daughter, but I want to run through every EP that she's released under Ethel Cain as well, because why not, you know? I have nothing better to do, you have nothing better to do, so let's get into it. Ethel Cain is a character created by Hayden Silas Ahedonia. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. She was born in Shady Grove, Alabama, to her mother, Vera Cain, and her father, Joseph Cain, who was a beloved preacher in their community. I say was because her father died in a fire 10 years before the events of Preacher's Daughter took place. Her father plays a vital role in her life, so remember him for later. Ethel has released 3 EPs, Carpetbed, Golden Age, and Inbred. These EPs are not canon to Ethel Cain's life, they're kind of like AUs or alternate universes in a way, but I still want to talk about them and connect bits and pieces of them to the larger project of Preacher's Daughter. There isn't as much information on the EPs as there is for Preacher's Daughter, so most of my analysis of the EPs will just be my interpretation of them, and I'm open to hearing other people's understandings as well. Before we start, I want to note that we will be covering very triggering topics in this video, so a general overall trigger warning in advance for that kind of stuff. I'll also give a specific trigger warning to the more intense songs as well. The first track of Carpetbed is titled Growing Pains. I see the song as a kind of young love or first love type of situation. At first I thought it was about maybe a father figure, but as the song goes on it takes on a more romantic tone. So I think it's about Ethel as a teenager and potentially an older person that she has fallen in love with. Dog Days describes a potentially toxic and codependent relationship. The guy she describes in the song is a kind of sketchy character, and you'll see that a lot with Ethel's taste in men. It's just terrible every single time, without fail. Not to spoil anything, but yeah. The song Misuse O is kind of a play on words. It's meant to sound like miss you so, and in the song she speaks about being the problem in the relationship. She feels guilty, like she messed everything up. The title Misuse O makes me think of 2 things. Either she misused her lover as a means of protection, as the lyrics seem to say, or he misused her, always playing the victim and gaslighting her into thinking that she's the problem. We'll see later when we get on to Preacher's Daughter that Ethel isn't always the most reliable narrator, and I think this trait carries across projects. The last song on this EP is called Antlers, and I believe this song is canon to the full Ethel Cain lore. It's a shorter one about her father on his deathbed. As I mentioned earlier, her father died 10 years before the events of Preacher's Daughter when Ethel was around 10 years old. The song is like the last words she'll say to her father while he's alive. She's telling him off about all of the trauma he's caused her, and at the end she repeats, "It's all your fault." In sort of a childish way, because you have to remember she's just a kid. The atmosphere of Carpetbed is overall pretty laid back and chill. It really makes you listen to the lyrics of each song instead of paying too much attention to the production, which kind of stays in the background and lets Ethel's voice and the ambient reverb shine through. It's a wonderful place to start the story of Ethel Cain. Ethel's second EP is called Golden Age. It's 2 songs longer than Carpetbed, and the songs are starting to get a little longer. Ethel loves making long songs, as you will later see. The first song off of Golden Age is called Sunday Morning, which Ethel Cain later interpolates in her song American Teenager, which, if you're watching this video essay, I'm assuming you've already heard before. It's her most streamed song at the moment, and I will talk about it a ton when we get to Preacher's Daughter, because there's a ton to unpack. As for Sunday Morning, I'm gonna be completely honest, I have no idea what she's talking about. There are 2 or 3 Ethel Cain songs that I just have no clue what on earth she's talking about, and this is one of them. To the best of my belief, I want to say that this song is about a toxic man, go figure. I think she's talking about how she got used to the pain that he caused her, so much that she feels uncomfortable when she's not in pain, but that's just my analysis from what I can understand. Casings is a pretty easy song to understand compared to Sunday Morning. It's that feeling you get when you feel like your partner is being unfaithful. She asks all these questions about this woman that she believes her lover is going to see, and the thought of him having someone else hurts her deeply, but since he's out, presumably to another woman, he'll never see her hurt. I also do not understand lilies very much, but again, I will try my best to interpret it for you. It seems like a love song on the surface, but with a sort of sense of hopelessness, either knowing or believing that this will end poorly, again with the unreliable narrator theme. She sings about how wonderful and angelic this person is, but she says that she's ultimately going to hurt him and that he's ultimately going to leave her, and her belief of this may be attributed to some previous relationship trauma. Trigger warning for self-harm. Head in the Wall is a very graphic song compared to everything else we've heard. We see in the first verse a depiction of self-harm, with her cutting herself and bleeding onto her bed. I feel like this song, like I mentioned with Miss Yuzo, is the result of a man manipulating her, and you can hear it with lyrics like, "When I'm just an ugly bitch, if I can freak." She speaks about wanting to get out of this situation, but she can't because she's stuck here. She hates him for it, she hates herself for it, she hates everyone around her for it, and she hates God for putting her in this horrible situation. Knuckle Velvet is, again, about another toxic man. Who would have thunk? And can I say the guitar in this song? It's literally amazing. Anyways, it's pretty similar in topic and theme to Sunday Morning, a horrible choice of man who acts like a child and is abusive and hurts her and she still can't leave. This is my absolute favorite song on this album, and it's just amazing. Every little thing and every little detail is just perfect. I love it so much.
Hello, this is Editing Me. I forgot to talk about Golden Age. And I don't have the time to record and find images for this song, so I'll just type it out here. Golden Age is a very self-deprecating song, in which she puts herself down, saying things like, "I'm so beautiful and it's wasted on me," and holding out like a dog they've yet to put down. However, the ending of the song takes a turn for the better, with her accepting that she's found a way and that she is growing despite everything.
To be completely honest, the CP really didn't stick out to me, but while writing this video, I really enjoyed listening to it. I guess it's a grower, especially Knuckle Velvet. Oh my god, that song is amazing. Anyway, yeah, this is a really solid EP, and if you don't like it at first, go back and listen to it after a couple days, weeks. For me, it took a couple of months, and you may be surprised. Also, this is what my friend said this EP looked like, and I just thought it was a perfect description. You're in a golden cathedral, it's ethereal, the reverb is echoing off the giant ceilings. That's just what this EP feels like. Inbred is my favorite of the 3 Ethel EPs, so I'll be spending a lot more time on this one than I did on the other EPs. The first track off of Inbred is Michelle Pfeiffer featuring Lil Aaron. I think this sort of fits into the larger story of Preacher's Daughter, as Ethel singing to her lover Willoughby, who we will be coming back to because he is an important character, and Lil Aaron acting as Willoughby singing back to Ethel. He's leaving, and she's saying that he's not home until she's with him, but since he's no longer there, she's no longer at home. Crush is Ethel's poppiest song besides American Teenager from Preacher's Daughter. It's about Ethel falling in love with a bad boy. again. He's always getting in trouble with the law and in fights, but Ethel loves him despite it. This song is also very fun to play on drums. I feel like that's valuable information for all of you. God's Country features Wicca Faye's Springs Eternal, and it is our first taste of a truly long Ethel Cain song. I separate it into three main parts: Ethel's part, Wicca Faye's Springs Eternal's part, and the outro. The first part is Ethel's, and it outlines kind of the feeling of being alone in the world as a young adult. You don't have your parents to help you anymore, so you have to make it on your own. It's usually hard for people born into poverty to escape it, and often they end up worse off than their parents. Ethel worries that this will happen to her own children, but she maintains a sense of hope about the future regardless. It's also hard for people like this to escape the effects of generational trauma, again with each generation of children having it a bit worse off. The second part is presumably by Ethel's lover. He's a bit childish and rowdy, but he's unlike most of the other guys Ethel sings about. He's a decent human being. Surprising, I know. He talks about being there for Ethel, not leaving her like Will did in Michelle Pfeiffer. This song's ending is also drenched in hope for the future, which is quite a contrast from most of Ethel's other music. The last few lines are surprisingly uplifting, and it's my favorite part of the whole song. Overall, God's Country is 8 minutes of pure heaven and one of her best works in my opinion. Before we start this one, I want to give a content warning for dark sexual themes. Unpunishable is about sex. Okay, well it's not that shallow, but I feel like this song kind of ties into Gibson Girl in a way, so I'll leave out some of the context of the song so I don't spoil anything from Preacher's Daughter. Ignoring the lore for a second, the song is a seductive song where Ethel is taking control of her lover, or so it seems. To bring back the unreliable narrator theme, I think the sort of God complex song is the result of brainwashing or trying to make the best of a terrible situation she's been put in, pretending she has power over this man, but ultimately knowing that he's the one who is in control of her. I can't really explain the rest of what I think the song is about without spoiling Preacher's Daughter, so we'll just leave it at that for the time being, and we will get back to this song when we look through Gibson Girl. Before we start this one, I want to give a major trigger warning for child sexual assault. Inbred is my favorite song on this EP, and it's also probably the darkest one. The song opens with a scene of Ethel as a young child. She's showing almost feral behavior, probably a result of parental neglect. In the first verse, she introduces us to her brother. Her brother, like literally every other man in her life, is shady as hell. He gets into trouble with the cops a lot, but Ethel is convinced he's a good person because he takes care of her. He does the bare minimum. Ethel's mother is in bed and she believes she's ill, but with more context it seems that Ethel's mother has been dead for actually a long time and that she's rotting. Her brother is probably keeping this information away from her. With her mom presumably being dead in the song, it's pretty obvious that it's not canon, as Ethel's mother is still alive by the end of Preacher's Daughter when Ethel is well past childhood at 21. The chorus introduces another character, the rapist. She talks about how she's helpless to defend herself from him and kind of defending him for what he does almost, saying that it's just the way he is. In the second verse, Ethel confronts this man, saying that her brother will protect her, that is, if he gets a break from his own troubles and demons. That was dark, wasn't it? To me, this is the most outright disturbing song in her entire discography, but it's not the most triggering. The song to me invokes a more sense of dread and uncomfortableness, but other songs in Preacher's Daughter make me feel a sense of compassion and fear for young Ethel, and I feel like people can connect to those songs a little more. The last song on the Inbred EP is Two-Headed Mother, and I don't even have the slightest idea of what the actual frick she's talking about. Like with other songs I didn't understand completely, I was still able to pull together maybe a vague idea of what it's about, but I literally can't even come up with anything for this one. I do really love it though, the guitar is insane, but I have no idea what this is about at all. Like I said, Inbred is my favorite of the Ethel Cain EPs, and the production is amazing, and I could talk about the songs on this album for so long, especially God's Country and Inbred, but we need to get to Preacher's Daughter and buckle in, because it's a wild ride. Preacher's Daughter opens with Family Tree intro. We begin with a recording from Hayden's great-grandmother's funeral from the 90s, with the preacher talking about what a beautiful gift a mother is. The first verse mentions her religious upbringing, which she seems to be leaving in the past, especially considering the next couple of lines. She has the skeletons of her past in her closet that she's trying to hide, but it's not working very well at all. The second verse outlines the ideas of generational trauma, which runs throughout Ethel's discography. Jesus in the Bible was known as the Son of God and Mary. Ethel, in this verse, is saying that while Jesus can try to downplay and escape his divinity, he cannot escape the humanity of his mother. And it seems like a parallel to Ethel's life. She can't escape the humanity of her parents. Even if she doesn't like or approve of her heritage, it is an innate part of her that she will forever be unable to escape. Ethel believes that the fate she references in the final verse essentially ruined her life by placing her in this family and set her up for failure by just being born. As we'll see later on in this story, Ethel very much goes in the opposite direction from her upbringing, as we can see in the publications that I'll show you when we get to those events. A contrast to the bass-heavy intro, American Teenager is a more upbeat song that provides a sense of nostalgia before the events of the album actually start taking place. Ethel begins to describe her childhood, including her upbringing in the church and small-town American things such as rooting for the high school football team. We then hear Ethel speak of a memory of her neighbor's brother returning home, but in a coffin. We learn that he was out at war, but Ethel justifies his death by saying he wanted to go, so it was his fault that he died, while also criticizing the stereotypical patriotic American dream. The chorus has sort of a double meaning for me. The first meaning is more literal, outlining the impact of war and violence. Army recruits are typically fresh out of high school, so it's literally a long, hard war with kids at the front. The second is more metaphorical, though. As I said before, Ethel's music spends a lot of time discussing generational trauma. The trauma is carried down through generations, with each generation of children having it worse. In the second verse, we get a scene from a Sunday morning. Since Ethel's dad died, she has been taking over the service for the last 10 years. However, recently, Ethel's lover, Willoughby Tucker, left her, so she has turned to alcohol to cope, which results in her leading church every Sunday while inebriated. We soon learn, however, that Ethel has lost faith in the church. Even while leading service, she doesn't feel the presence of the Lord anymore. Ethel said in an interview, "They make you think that it's all achievable and that if nothing else, you should at least die trying. What they don't tell you is that you need your neighbor more than your country needs you. I wrote this song as an expression of my frustration with all the things the American teenager is supposed to be but never had any real chance of becoming." We learn more about Willoughby Tucker in A House in Nebraska. We'll see that Will is the only man that Ethel ever felt truly comfortable with, although he still wasn't the greatest person. The first verse is melancholy and nostalgic. It reminisces on the time that Ethel spent with Will, the good times and the bad times. The house in Nebraska that she refers to is actually just an abandoned house in Alabama that the two of them used to pretend was theirs in Nebraska. The abandoned, dirtied mattress didn't matter to the two of them. As long as they had each other, they were fine. They walked to their house in Nebraska so many times that it created a dirt road leading there. Ethel's close with Will's family, so his mother often calls her to check on her now that he's gone. Still, she can't tell her how she really feels horrible, so she just lies to his mom so that she won't worry about her. We don't know just why Willoughby left, but Ethel feels guilty about it for reasons that we never learn. Even though he's never coming back, Ethel still waits for him and prays that he will maybe one day. She drinks to alleviate the pain, as we learned in American Teenager, but it just makes all of her feelings even worse. He was the only person that Ethel was able to express herself to, and now that he's gone, she's all alone. In Western Nights, Ethel rebounds with a guy named Logan Phelps. Now this Logan guy is sketchy with a capital S. He is literally a robber who gets into fights frequently and puts her in unsafe situations without seeming to care about her well-being as much as he should. He seems to only care during their sexual encounters. The chorus shows how devoted she is to this man, even though he shows disregard to her. She says she's crying because she's happy, not because she's actually miserable in this situation. The second verse remarks on the time it's been since she's seen her father. 10 years. She seems to ignore the fact that she's dead though, and she says that she hasn't spoken to him because she doesn't want him to worry. I think the men she's attracted to can, in part, be attributed to her father, who wasn't good to her when she was a child. The outro of the song enforces the idea of her devotion to him, even though he doesn't show the same attentiveness towards her. She tells him, "Please don't love how I need you," afraid that since she is so attached to him, he will use this to take advantage of her. Despite all of these blaring red flags, in Family Tree, Logan appears to have proposed to Ethel. She says that she wants him to make a woman out of her now that they're married, but in the very next line, she knows that she's still a child. It seems that her mother was either violent to her or others, making Ethel, as a child, believe that violence is the superior choice, and her relationship with her father just reinforces this point. On the second verse, she references two-headed mothers, "I've loved before, I'll kill again," by saying, "I've killed before, and I'll kill again." I think this shows the growth between Inbred and Preacher's Daughter, where Ethel has just given up on love. It also references the first song of the album, where she is hanging from the family tree. She has now removed the noose and is ready to use it to hang others. Ethel is in mourning, as her husband has just been killed in a failed robbery, and it feels like hell, but hell doesn't scare her anymore since she's been through a lot of horrible things in her life. In another reference to the first track of the album, Ethel is praying for forgiveness for the skeletons in her closet and the bone she's about to leave, either alluding that she just killed a man or that Logan's death is just another skeleton in the closet. Let's hope it's the latter. Probably my biggest trigger warning of all for child essay and incest. We take a break from the action to take another look back at Ethel's childhood. Ethel's father was sexually abusive to her when she was only 9 years old. He died when she was 10, so this behavior only lasted about a year, but it was enough to leave her long-lasting scars for the rest of her life. She uses the imagery of being hidden under leaves as symbolism for her father hiding his sins as the community's preacher. After Joseph Cain's death, the whole town still sells stories about what a wonderful man he was 10 years later, and only Ethel knows the truth. Only Ethel knows his dark side. Being a sheltered kid, he was able to manipulate Ethel into believing that what he was doing was love, and she says she made pretend that it was, feeding into her innocence. In the chorus, she shows a sense of guilt about what had happened to her, a common occurrence in victims of abuse. On the last line of the chorus, a little girl who needs her daddy real bad, she expresses the need for her daddy, not this man who's taking advantage of her. We then see another scene from her childhood on her birthday. Her father is watching her from the corner, but he isn't watching her as a fatherly act of love and protection. He's watching her as an incestual act of lust and longing, but she does not understand this because of her age. Even with his abuse, she still admires her father and who he was when he wasn't abusing her, finding herself wishing to be like the person everybody else saw, even now, years later. The outro of the song is comprised of heartbreaking begging for her father to stop. Ethel's father would come to her room at night to abuse her, and she's too tired to resist him. She says it's just the way that he is, to sort of justify the behavior. Again, a common thing in survivors of SA. All she wants to do is sleep. Well, that was heavy, wasn't it? That was the last track of Act 1 of this album. So before we move on to Act 2, we'll do a quick summary. We open the album with an overview of the events to come and a quick look at Ethel's childhood. We then learn how much she misses Willoughby before she rebounds with Logan. Logan then marries her, but soon after is killed in a robbery gone wrong. After this, she flees to Texas. The first act closes with a look back at the abuse she suffered under her father as a child. The second act opens with the longest track on the album, Thoroughfare. Now in Texas, Ethel meets a young man named Isaiah Abram, red flag number 1, don't trust Bible names, from Florida. Red flag number 2, never trust a man from Florida. She's looking really rough, her clothes are all torn, and she has a gun in her pocket for safety since she doesn't trust anyone. According to Ethel, she got into Isaiah's truck of her own free will, but a missing poster was put up soon after she got into the truck, with eyewitnesses saying that she was forced into it by Isaiah. This is the unreliable narrator thing I was talking about earlier, remember? Either way, she's in his truck, and Isaiah, allegedly, because we can't trust Ethel's judgment at this point, asks her if she wants to go travel the West with them to find love. She said that love never meant much to her, but she's fine going with him, which, can I say, is the dumbest decision you could have possibly made. Like, this man calls to you from the side of the road like, hey, you want to go travel the West with me? And she's just like, sure, what could possibly go wrong? But anyway, they both set off to California to find him a lover, but as they go along, they begin to fall in love with each other. Ethel says, for the first time since I was a child, I could see a man who wasn't angry. Isaiah says that Ethel is giving him meaning in life. After they reach the coast of California, Isaiah notes that he hasn't found a lover yet, but he thinks that Ethel may be, in fact, what he was searching for the entire time. Ethel has fallen in love again, and she is truly happy as the song ends with a 2.5-minute instrumental with her vocalizing over a country atmosphere. It gives a sense of freedom and joy because everything's going well for once. Everything is going to be alright. Right? Wrong. Isn't that lovely? Trigger warning for sexual assault and dark sexual themes. In Gibson Girl, we learn that in California, Isaiah Abrams has been feeding her drugs and pimping her out in the back of nightclubs. Remember when I said that I thought Unpunishable fit into this narrative? Well, I'm going to take a second to talk about Unpunishable a little bit more. Since Isaiah is prostituting her, she is at the mercy of these men. She has to please them however they want her to, as you can see her asking in the first verse of Unpunishable. As I said back when we were still discussing the EP Inbred, the influence of drugs has brainwashed her into believing that she is in power when really the men she is given to are able to do whatever they want to her. Now back to Gibson Girl. The title refers to Charles Dana Gibson and the women he famously drew, often considered the pinnacle of American beauty standards, as Genius puts it. In the first verse, all sorts of men are coming to her from all over, but to her, under the influence of the drugs that Isaiah has been feeding her, they're all the same. The chorus starts with lines commonly used by groomers and sexual abusers. If it feels good, then it can't be bad. Ethel's trying to convince herself that everything is okay. She's also taking this chance to rebel against her upbringing. In the second verse, we see a more vulnerable and helpless Ethel. She's begging Isaiah not to tell her if he hates her. She wants to believe that he loves her because it's what's keeping her going. In the outro, we again, similar to Hard Times, see Ethel mistaking lust for love. Her innocence is still apparent even after everything that she's been through. Trigger warning for violence for the next 3 songs. Ptolemaea is probably Ethel's creepiest song. In Dante's Inferno, Ptolemaea is the circle of hell where the traitors reside. It opens with a voice that sounds like a demon, with Isaiah talking to a heavily drugged and hallucinating Ethel. Isaiah is saying all of these things to Ethel to keep her with him, telling her that he loves her when he really doesn't. Ethel describes herself as a wolf crying to him because he says that he loves her. He sees her as innocent and pure due to her upbringing, so he's able to manipulate her more easily. She wonders where her parents are, showing the extent of her drugging and her lost grip on reality. Her parents aren't there. She's in California with Isaiah. The title of Ptolemaea suggests that Ethel feels like a traitor by going against her upbringing. Then Isaiah begins to attack Ethel. The song ends with a prayer by Isaiah, which turns the title of traitor from Ethel to her parents. He touches on the generational trauma and abuse from her father that doomed her to this fate from the moment that she was born into this world. Then, the voice of death speaks. Ethel at this point has gotten away and is running from Isaiah, but death reminds Ethel that death is inevitable. August Underground is an instrumental track in which Ethel is trying to get away from a murderous Isaiah in a shack in the woods, but he eventually catches her and kills her. It's named after a faux snuff film from 2001. Televangelism, another instrumental track, shows Ethel's soul ascending to heaven or some sort of afterlife. I believe that it's the afterlife, not heaven, which I will back up when we get to the final track. Hayden confirmed in a Tumblr post that both songs, August Underground and Televangelism, happened simultaneously. The last two tracks of Preacher's Daughter happen after Ethel has passed away. The first of these, Sun-Bleached Flies, opens with the scene of sun-bleached flies sitting on a windowsill. Since the flies have been bleached by the sun, it shows that they've probably been sitting there dead for a long time. The flies can represent two things, the first being a Christian mother. They've been taught all these things at their church, and they speak about their children who are also breathing in the same poison as they are. The second interpretation, and my personal favorite, is that the sun-bleached fly is Ethel. Flies often fly into windows over and over again and kill themselves just to try to get back outside. This can relate to Ethel trying to escape from the generational trauma that she's become accustomed to just for her to die in the end. But you can see that the flies on the windowsill are still hoping for the day that they escape, even though they're already dead and have been dead for a while. This seems to suggest that even though Ethel has suffered a horrible death at the hands of Isaiah, she still has hope for the future, which is kind of a callback to God's country. Even though the church invoked bad feelings in Ethel, here, at the end of her life, she still misses the sense of community and safety it had. God loves you, but not enough to save you is one of Ethel's most heartbreaking lyrics. She says, "For a brief moment, when I started making music, it was like upside-down crosses and Satan, but I came to this realization: Satan is not in control. Satan doesn't have any power. God is what is scary. God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and puts Satan in his place, if we're going by biblical mythology. If you want power, if you want horror, you have to go to the biggest boss." And growing up, I heard the words, "God loves you," all the time. Somebody would say the most rancid, evil shit to you, and then they're like, "God loves you." So I love to put it in music. It's like, is that a threat? The chorus gives a callback to the cycle of violence that was discussed back when we were talking about Family Tree. The violence is so ingrained in her, but now she realizes that giving in to these instincts would only further the cycle of trauma. In the second verse, we see Ethel talking about how she's sick of just sitting there and taking everything with a smile on her face. She is now ready to stand up for herself. The last two lines of the chorus give a little more context. All along, she knew that God wouldn't save her, but even still, she kept praying to an unresponsive God. The bridge shows Ethel refusing to take part in extended generational trauma that has been passed down to her over years and years. She is finally at peace. Even still, the outro finds Ethel thinking about that house in Nebraska with Willoughby, the only man who she ever really loved. All she wants, even in death, as she goes on to the afterlife, is to be with Willoughby. Trigger warning for disturbing content. That's all I can say without spoiling it. Well guys, we've made it to the end of Preacher's Daughter. The final track, and my personal favorite song, Strangers, gives a perfect conclusion to the story of Ethel Cain. It opens with an excerpt from the sermon from her great-grandmother's funeral, a callback to the very first track on this record. The first verse gives a scene of Ethel's dead corpse in Isaiah's basement. She thinks about how none of this would have happened if she had listened to what she'd been told and not talked to strangers. We learn that Ethel is in Isaiah's freezer. Why is Ethel in Isaiah's freezer? Because Isaiah freaking eats her. You heard me. Isaiah eats Ethel's frozen corpse. She says that she never considered herself tough. Her meat is tough to eat. Ironic because Isaiah took advantage of her because of how weak and innocent she appeared. While she awaits being eaten, she remarks on how handsome Isaiah is, even though he's literally about to freaking eat her. Come on, Ethel, you're dead now. Please have standards. Anyways, the beginning of the chorus references back to hard times, where she talks about how she wants to be a good guy and she wants to be happy, and now she's asking Isaiah if she's good, as he is eating her. Not just literally, do I taste good, but also, was she a good enough partner for him? All that's left of her now is the Polaroid proof of her existence. After everything that Isaiah did, still, all she wanted to be was his. She wanted to devote herself to someone, and you can see the sad pattern every time she devotes herself to someone. From Logan to Willoughby, something always goes horribly wrong. Ethel uses turning in your stomach to mean turning in your grave, which is typically used to say a deceased person would be upset with what was happening. A genius analysis says that Ethel is turning in her grave, or Isaiah's stomach, because he freaking ate her, because her mom will never find her and know what happened to her. Oh, and turning in your stomach also means that she gave Isaiah food poisoning, because he freaking ate her. Into the second verse, we get a scene of Ethel's mother seeing her face on a milk carton at Winn-Dixie, a commonplace southern market. But the sad thing is that Ethel Cain will never know what happened to her daughter because Isaiah freaking ate her. The next line seemed to suggest that Isaiah sees eating Ethel as a form of love, which is weird, to say the least. But what do you expect from a man from Florida? Let's be real. Anyway, she says that since he told her she should be happy, she believes that she is happy. And this calls back to the line in Gibson Girl, if it feels good, then it can't be bad, which is used to manipulate Ethel. This also calls back to Western Nights when she says that she's crying only because she's happy, not because she's miserable. Isaiah has a lot of power over Ethel. She'll do and feel whatever he tells her to. Ethel calls Isaiah handsome again as her remains are in his mouth, because he freaking ate her. In the final moments of this album, Ethel meets her father in the afterlife. Some people interpret it as heaven, but with everything that Joseph Cain did to Ethel, I just can't believe that both of them would end up in heaven. She says that she never blamed him for anything that he did to her, and that she still loved him either way, no matter how bad for her it was. And you can see how this connects to her relationships with men later on in her life, well after his death. After Ethel reunites with her father, she returns and talks to her mother back on Earth, who is still alive. She tells her mom not to worry about her too much, and to continue living her life, and when she inevitably dies as well, she will be glad to see her once again. Did I mention that Isaiah freaking ate? So, there you have it, the full lore of Ethel Cain. It's pretty crazy, and it's not even over. Hayden is planning to release an EP about Ethel and Willoughby's relationship, so hopefully we get more insight on just why he left. She's also planning on releasing 2 more full albums, focusing on Ethel's mother and Ethel's grandmother, along with 3 books and 3 movies to correspond to each album. So yeah, Hayden's been busy. I'd like to say that I really enjoyed making this and listening deeper to all of Ethel Cain's stuff. It was really, really fun. I'm going to link all of the sources I used to make this in the description, along with the playlist of all of my favorite Ethel songs. In closing, there's one main lesson that I want all of you to draw from Ethel Cain's story. Never trust a man from Florida.